Welcome to The Partnership Path, the podcast that empowers you to unlock your full potential in partner management. Gain invaluable insights from industry experts, discover proven strategies, and learn how to navigate real-world challenges. Join our community by subscribing now and start your journey to partnership success.
Hello, John.
Hi, Tony. How are you today?
Well, I am thoughtful today
Okay.
because I've been mulling over even something that you said to me after our last episode where we
Oh,
talked about marketing.
okay. What, am I
So
in trouble?
I don't think so. One thing that people love, actually, so when it comes to marketing, and certainly in lots of the content that I've worked on,
Yep.
love an analyst statistic.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, and I had spoken about a statistic which said that 70% of people don't want to interact with a salesperson until quite late on
Yeah.
in the sales process.
Yeah.
And because you're a pragmatist
Yeah.
and I'm open-minded and an optimist, you had some really interesting thoughts on that and how we can question, challenge, or think critically
Yeah.
about what we read in that
Yeah.
regard. So I thought it'd be worth us or you sharing what you shared with
Sure.
me when we spoke after the last episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Look, I'm glad you brought that up because I do remember saying that to you. And look, with this, the statistic that particular statistic from Gartner gets kind of morphed in a lot of different ways. You just a minute ago said it one way, which was that 70% of the people don't want to engage or whatever. I've also heard it as customers are 70% of the way through the sales cycle before they engage with a vendor. I've also heard it as customers are 70% of the way through their decision by the time they talk to a salesperson. And that alone, I think, raises some questions about the actual statistic, right? That people are repeating it in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
And I also think when we hear an analyst, statistic or result or, their conclusion or whatever, I think it's healthy for us to kind of put our own analytical hat on and kind of challenge that a little bit and make sure that that resonates for us. And that particular one rubs me very rough, right? Because I think that here's what I think I said to you that day is I think that customers used to contact vendors earlier in their process to get material because that was the only way they could get material, right? You and I are both old enough to remember before everything was on the internet and we actually sent brochures and all that kind of stuff to people. And so they would contact the vendor, but they weren't actually in a sales cycle yet. They were investigating, which they still do today. And they do a lot of investigating today. Now, the internet means that there's a whole lot more information out there for people to investigate and educate themselves. But where it rubs me the wrong way is when people say that the sales cycle is 70% complete by the time a salesperson gets involved. And I don't think that's even remotely true. I certainly don't experience that in my own business. As you know, my business has both an indirect channel side and a direct selling side. And we certainly don't see that with our customers either, that somehow these buyers are, almost done in their decision when they engage with a vendor. That's just not true. It makes for great analytical, research, and it's a great push for content marketing, which I am a big believer in. I think it's super helpful. Just sometimes I think those statistics get a little overused maybe or wrongly used, and that kind of bugs me.
And I think that's why I was really keen for you to kind of share that, because you're right, we need to be able to think critically about the statistics that are shared and certainly the role of the salesperson or the account manager or territory manager. It's really important. I mean, we wouldn't have any. I guess if customers were already done by the time they spoke to
Yeah.
a salesperson, well, we wouldn't be any, would there?
Right.
We
practically don't need
yeah,
salespeople. Then we just need order
yeah,
takers, right? And that's
yeah.
not true.
It's not true.
What
No.
my favorite example of this, by the way, is the Challenger sale. I don't know if you ever read the Challenger sale book.
No, writing it down.
So it was a book that was written by two Gartner analysts who had a ton of data. And then they left Gartner and they took all that data and then they created this book called the Challenger sale, which was a very popular sales methodology and still is today. But when I, as a technical guy, when I read their research, I could draw slightly different conclusions from a lot of their data. Like I get how they got to their conclusions, but I can read their data and go, I could also conclude something different. And I think that's true of all analyst stuff. If you get to the data and you really look at it critically, you could probably draw multiple conclusions that aren't necessarily complementary. Sometimes they're even conflict. And so you just always have to remember the analysts have a job, right? And you have a job too, which is to look critically at that stuff and kind of figure out what really makes sense for your market.
Great.
There, I'll get off my little preaching stool for a minute. And
well, I mean, this is what makes it interesting. You've got to have an opinion, haven't you? Got to have an opinion.
You do. And I'm terrified of having an opinion, by the way. I like me just now putting that out there. The Challenger salespeople are going to probably hate me. And I'm always afraid of putting opinions out there. So anyway.
Well, I think that you kind of teed it up nicely for our plan for today, which is to talk about account and territory mapping. Because something that I know is true is that the way one organization draws its territory will be different from the way another organization might draw its territory, and certainly from having that vendor experience where parts of the business were organized by geography. So for small business, organized by geography, but for enterprise business, organized by industry.
Right.
And then you might even have a sales team that are organized by solution. Then you've got matrix selling. So how do you, as a partnerships manager, territory manager, align what could be something completely different to what your partner has as their own account territory?
Yeah, look, it's super complicated, right? I think this is one of the most complicated parts of any kind of partnership, is that account mapping, territory mapping kind of grid that has to be put together, because it's not just that the two organizations have different lines that are drawn, but those lines are often related to compensation, right? And so I've got a territory that I get paid for. And if when I sit down with my partner, their lines are different and half of what they want to go after is outside of my line, I don't get paid on that. And so that colors the way I approach it, right? And so, I think it's super complicated, and we have to acknowledge that is the reality, is that compensation comes into play here. And it's going to impact how both parties come to the table and want to engage together.
So do you think that it's okay to ask, what do you get compensated on?
100%. Not only is it okay, it's expected. Like, if, we talked about this early on in some of the episodes, right? Which is, if you're going to be a partner, that means transparency. That means being honest about, why am I here and what do I get out of being here? And that does translate down to some personal level. Now, saying, hey, look, here's how I get compensated, here's my boundaries, all of that, doesn't give you the right to never do anything outside those boundaries in the name of the partnership. But I think understanding and communicating, here's what I care the most about, here's what you care the most about, I think it's a requirement of partnering, not just an okay thing. I think it's a requirement.
Yeah.
I'm really
And
being
that's
very
really
opinionated
refreshing.
today, aren't I?
Well, and I think it's really refreshing to hear because there is, from a kind of British sensibility, that, oh God, I can't talk about money. But you, you can say, what do you get compensated on? But you don't have to ask, how much do you
How
get
much? That's right.
compensated?
That's right.
And I think doing that actually does give you the opportunity to tag team with colleagues across the business. So
Yeah.
an approach that, you kind of get is that, we would call it one Microsoft. So you might have someone that is OEM, someone that is Azure, someone that is, you kind of
Yeah.
look for, okay, I don't get compensated on that part of my partner's priorities,
Right.
but those people do. So
Yeah.
how do we align and bring them in?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. It's about, just like everything else we've talked about, it's about coming to the table and being transparent about, here's
Mm,
how we're organized. Here's where our lines are drawn. Here's how that impacts compensation for people. Here's, the kind of motivation that you're going to come across. And
mm,
now, given that, how do I help you, partner, bridge to things that I don't care about or I'm not motivated to help you with? But how do I help you bridge it? And then how do we
mm,
together maximize where we do have common interest? And what does
yeah,
that look like? What accounts are there? Which ones can we go after? What territory segmentation can we do together? What solution segmentation, industry segmentation, whatever makes sense? How do we
mm,
drive it? And that goes all the way back to the very beginning of
mm,
kind of defining the boundaries of the partnership. What's in the
yeah,
sandbox and what's not in the sandbox. And that it comes
yeah.
right down to some really pragmatic compensation kind of stuff sometimes.
Mm. And it's quite, I'm trying to think about whether we discussed that as part of the initial, if we think about the process of creating the partnership plan, um, and draw it would be something that, yeah, feeds into that whole process, wouldn't it? To
Yeah.
say, okay, yeah, you've kind of got the partners priorities, your priorities, then you've got what the partnership needs to achieve.
Yeah.
And then when you're looking at each of the individual stakeholders, a great question to ask is, what do you care about? What are you compensated on?
Yeah.
And you might not want to write that down, but it's
Yeah.
absolutely part of the building trust,
Yeah.
creating that, like you say, the
For sure.
boundaries, the
That's right.
framework for success.
In the model that we use, we talk about a 3-layer kind of planning, right? We talk about a strategic layer that talks about, what are the boundaries of our two organizations coming together and what's our kind
Mm,
of long-term vision. And
mm,
and that's a very organizational based perspective, right? That is
mm.
visionary, long-term, and we call that strategic alignment. We did an episode on that.
Yeah, yeah,
And then a layer below that we called tactical alignment, which is really
yeah.
about short-term business priorities. That gets to more of a departmental, like, how is my team compensated? What are
Mm,
we charged with this year? That's in the Microsoft world, we're focused on Azure cycles this year versus something else.
yeah.
Or at Infor, that might be, hey, we really need to move to Cloud Suite financials versus
Mm,
our on-prem, whatever it is, or kind of priorities that are business related that have a somewhat impact on my personal comp, but mostly around kind of the department I'm
mm,
in. And then we talk about that third layer, which is go to market execution, like putting together a
mm.
campaign or doing account or territory mapping together to go after specific
Yeah,
targets. And that becomes very personal on both sides.
yeah.
Right. So I think it's all three. And it's really important to know where you're at in that discussion. Are we talking at that lower level or are we talking at that really high level right now?
Yeah. It's something that I've seen done previously, depends on the size of your organizations, is a form of speed dating for
Yeah.
account mapping. So
Yeah.
you're bringing together account and I think,
Yeah.
yeah, you can think quite creatively about how you might do that. So you might not need to do all the work, you just need to make the introduction.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's a big part of the partner manager, channel manager job, right? Is to hook those two sales teams up in the most creative
Yeah.
way possible, where they'll be motivated to work together. But that means doing the hard work of kind of figuring out where the lines are and where people are going to be motivated and where they're not, so that speed dating can actually be super effective.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear how people are doing it, right? How are they overcoming some of those obstacles? And I mean, quite honestly, this is one of those that I'd love to hear some horror stories on, like where, some lessons learned of like, where did I do it wrong and what happened? Because I think people can learn from that. This is one of those places where kind of knowing in advance what someone else did that didn't work would be really helpful.
Yes, I think that is a great idea. And I guess and thinking about what you said, there's a nice lesson in there as well about sometimes you might feel like if someone says, I don't care about it, it doesn't mean I don't care about you or I don't care about the partnership. It's just that you don't realize what that person's compensated on, what that team is compensated on, whether it matters to them. So I think there's a nice lesson in there. But I would very much like to hear some constructive horror stories.
Of course, right? We don't want to just have we don't want to have just people come in and complain, but lessons learned from something horrible would be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, listeners, can't wait to hear from you guys on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Remember, you have the potential to shine in the world of partner management. But don't stop here. Subscribe, reflect, and help us redefine the essence of partnership excellence. Until next time.